My name is Zach Silberschlag, and I play principal trumpet with the Hawaii Symphony. Okay, so the topic that I am going to talk to you about today, as advertised, is Arban, the Art of Phrasing. And that's a section in the back of the Arban book. A lot of trumpet players will probably know who Jean-Baptiste Arban is, but in case you didn't know, he's a French cornetist that wrote probably the fundamental comprehensive technique method for trumpet or cornet at the time. Those of you that don't know, cornet is just a slightly more conical instrument than this, a little bit rounder and shorter. Um, and Most of what's in the book are technique and drills, but there is a section in the back called the Art of Phrasing, which deals with musical and yeah, like musical etudes. They're there to really grow your musicianship and your phrasing, which we'll talk about. So I thought I was given this idea by a student of mine who is uh, I think 14, and I said I was asked to do the live stream, and I said, what did you think? What would you think would be an interesting topic? And he said phrasing, because I think that he felt. This is Blake Hironaka in Kauai. Shout out to Blake if he's watching. He felt, I think, that in orchestra or in lessons, in youth orchestra or in lessons or in band, probably particularly, people were telling him to phrase or play musically, and he really didn't know what that was or how to get to that exactly. Um, at first, I mean, he does. He's an incredibly advanced student, so now he does. But and so I was going to talk about that, and I wanted to take an exercise, an etude out of the art of phrase, to illustrate that best. Okay, great. So you'll see number 111 in the section, the art of phrasing. It's something called La Sonnambula. And so this was what I wanted to talk about first, about how to approach something. And this goes for really any type of music that you're playing. So what is it that you're playing? Uh, La Sonnambula is an Italian opera by the composer Vincenzo Bellini. And so this informs us already in a few ways that will inform how we're going to phrase and play musically. So Bellini, as I said, he's an Italian opera composer of, I'd say, the bel canto style. So means for us that we already have some information on all the aspects that come together to make something musical, which I would say include dynamics, articulation. Um, I guess we want some triple tonguing tips. We'll get to triple tonguing tips for sure. Okay, K3I. Um, so phrasing, musical playing. So articulation, I would say vibrato, which for those of you who don't know what vibrato is, a pulsing of the air. And they're a culmination of all these things coming together. So in the Italian opera style of Bellini's time, where this tune comes from, they would be playing in I would say a nicely sized amphitheater. So even our pianos want to still be singing and of a singing quality, and our articulation is going to be more vocal, so not necessarily your trumpet fanfare type, but we might be thinking in other syllables that would be more vocal, which we'll talk about in more detail. And I'd say the vibrato is, or the pulsing of the air, as we could think of it, is going to accent where we decide our phrases are. So the reason I chose this specific excerpt from La Sonnambula is for a few reasons. Some of these Arban melodies don't have much editorial information. This one in the Goldman edition does have more hairpins, so crescendo diminuendi that look like this, which can help us find where a phrase is, where a collection of notes going together specifically are going to be grouped, so that we could think of that as a phrase, and then where the peak of that phrase or the highest point is illustrated actually. So let me just show you what I'm looking at here. I don't know, is that backwards? Maybe. Yeah, so a collection of so in the middle of this collection of groups, which is highlighted by the hairpin, so at the beginning, where the smallest point of the hairpin is, that we could say the beginning of the phrase, the largest part of the hairpin being the peak of the phrase, and then coming down again. This is written a little more in the addition, so it's a little more to the point, so you know where the phrase is. And then we'll do some different things to highlight the phrase. So let's take the first phrase, and I'll play what could be the first phrase, or half of the phrase, and then we'll get into it. Right, so the first note, we start a little softer, we crescendo through it. I like to think of, if you Google or YouTube some of these etudes, um, even if you just have the opera name, you can find that there's recordings of the aria that you're playing. And so this one, the actual words start to it are ah no. So I like to think of that syllable. So even like a ta no. So that's what I'm thinking about vocal articulation. Da no da da da. Then I'm thinking of really moving my air a little bit quicker to the B flat, where would be the high point of that phrase, and then coming down away. So let me continue on with the next phrase. So I think those first two sections that have a rest in between could be thought of as one phrase with two smaller categories, right? So they're both in this edition have two hairpins, but I could think of them as one long phrase with micro phrases in between. So I think always in classical music you're searching for where can the phrase be longer and how many more lines can we connect. So playing musically would be a culmination of all these things: the dynamic, the vibrato, articulation. With trumpet, as in with singing, it's very much related to where you need to breathe and where breathing is natural. I think that you can go point by point through this and find each phrase where you'd like to have it. And there's not necessarily a wrong way to phrase something. It's that first you have to make a choice. You say, this is the phrase, here's how I'm going to highlight it with this dynamic and vibrato and articulation. And then there are certain stylistic things like this music we would think of as a bel canto, so there's some certain style phrasings or where it's obvious that the phrase is to us. And then after, in other types of music, in a classical concerto like my colleague Joanne discussed in her live stream in the Haydn, you would do that differently, and there's ways to do that differently and that you can think of. I'd say the most important thing to knowing how to phrase is to have some sort of reference point, and that really is about developing your ear by listening to all types of different music. Now, I think that there are some certain trumpet players that you can listen to that will show you so much about phrasing. And we can put this in the comments later too, but I would say Timofey Dockschitzer is an excellent example of some phrasing that was a lot of his music is the way he approaches it is like a beautiful singer. I'd say Gerard Schwartz, his cornet favorite albums, and personally I've learned a ton about phrasing from my family. My father's a drum player, my mother's a bassoonist, my brother's a hornist, and so I think different instruments are imperative, and especially listening to great singing. Like if you look up La Sonnambula, the first thing that comes up is a Maria Callas, who is a incredible opera star. And you can listen to her sing this aria, which will give you endless different ideas about articulation and sound and just seep in naturally. I think that you can go through certain levels when approaching something brand new. So you'd first, what is it? What we talked about, what you can even learn from the title, and this goes for any solo or any orchestra piece or band piece. Then, we are lucky to live in this time of having YouTube and Spotify, and you can look it up, and chances are there's going to be a recording of something of it. And so that's already going to give you um, a huge amount of uh, information if you're really listening critically. And then I would, when you're starting to approach it, decide what seems like the first phrase or two. So that's inherent in me learning a piece, is that I want to see divided into sections. So where is my first collection of notes that I think go together? And this could change, and hopefully will change over a part of. So I'll start to um, develop my own musical ideas from the recording, or change my musical ideas. But first things first, I'm going to just take a shot in the dark and say, okay, I think this is the first phrase. And then I'm going to play through it, familiarize myself with it, and then begin to refine it and realize it both musically and technically. I see those things as going together and really adding a section at a time. And then I would listen to the recording. I would add the phrases myself, building them together, and then play it and record it for myself to see if what I'm hearing is coming across. I'm hearing in the version that I'd like in my head. If I am honoring what's on the page, and then I try to just get that as close together as possible. We had some questions about triple tonguing. Is that person still there? Yes. Okay. The triple tonguing. Let's talk a little triple tonguing. Okay. Arban is another great thing for triple tonguing. The basis of triple tonguing and articulations, right? I would approach it with syllables, right? So when you're simple or single tonguing, it's a repeated maybe ta or tu or tu attack. When you're triple tonguing or double tonguing, it's a ka attack or ku. So I think a very common mistake about triple tonguing is the lack of air connecting the notes. You get too caught up thinking, oh, I have to tongue really fast, and so it gets really choppy, and it can actually slow you down and make it not as elegant sounding. I think then other problems could be the stroke isn't right. So let's okay, here's a single tongue. So those are all two or toe or two syllable. Now in the Arban, I think this is page 155. He starts his section on triple tonguing, and so I think you should really start out slow to make sure the stroke of the tongue is right. Meaning like you have a clear tu and a clear ka or ku. He's written here tuku tuku tuku. Arban was French, so and this addition. So you have to find a syllable that works for you, that is not constricting the air but is having a clear syllable. So here's would be a slow version of tu tu ku tu tu ku tu. So later, as you get that faster, and as you practice making sure you're basically practicing twice as slow and then faster, it should sound more even and fluid like. going through that just like that in that exercise and just trying to get it right in an isolated way uh, on one note at a time will later allow you to be able to do a lot more with triple tonguing. So, okay, what else? What else? Anybody else have any questions? I see that Marie is watching. A lot of these phrasing tips are not only good for trumpet, but are good for other. Oh, yes, Nathaniel Silberschlag. It's so funny that people in the Cleveland Orchestra need to learn about phrasing also. Yes, it is great for other instruments. Thank you for the question, Nathaniel. Chase Coop. Yeah. Arban is good for other instruments. It would be great to practice on any other B flat instrument, the art of phrasing, but also I would just read it as is, so the key signature is still idiomatic to your instrument, and just read it as is. Chase Coop says Jeff Silberschlag, best trumpet player to ever do it. Agreed. Jeff Silberschlag, play some more. Okay, well, I'll play some more of the Arban melody. Is there a specific syllable that you think is better than others except tuku or taka? Yeah, I think that this depends on the person. It depends on the person's mouth. But I think that you could think totoko, or tiu, like tiu, and ku, or dadaga, like daga. I think that generally starting out tuku is a good place to start. But then when you're working on speed, I would say daga and stuff like that. Demonstrate your phrasing process practice. Okay, we'll just continue on then the way I was doing. Okay, so this back to La Sonnambula, I played through the first phrase, and now we'll do this next phrase, and I'll be even more transparent in my process. So I'd say the first phrase was in 1, 2, 3, 4 bars, which means that I might be looking the next 4 bars to see if there's a phrase in the next 4 or where the higher point is in there. So let's just count from after the pickup. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think, and I think it's a similar thing where we're going to have 2 high points in the phrase in the next 4 measures. And that's illustrated in this with hairpins where the high points are. So I've found that phrase, and I'm going to go back and I'll play through it, and I'll make sure to show where the high points are, and then more how I get to it. So I found 2 high points. One is here. And I'm going to emphasize that with a little bit of the pulsing of the air. And another thing is in phrasing, sometimes you cannot be too literal about the rests, and you have to play through the rest. So if I were to read that as very rhythmic and in observing the rests, it might look like this. Which sounds too stopped. It sounds too choppy. Does the amount of air you have affect how long a phrase can be? Definitely. And I would say, as you're starting out, your phrases may not be as long because you're still working out how far your support can last. But that being said, you can take many breaths in a musical way as long as you can sort of mask the breath in a musical way. So I'll show you. I don't need to take a breath in these next I'd say like 4 measures or so, as to not break the phrase. But if I needed to, I can show you where, and I would just. But also, where you need to take the breath can inform where your phrase is. So if you need to breathe, find somewhere that is related to where the phrase is coming down, and take a breath there. So, but in spite of that, you want to shorten the rests in this type of romantic music, and look for opportunities to play through and sustain through the phrase. Um, I think we should probably put a copy of this music up too, so you can understand what I'm talking about. But so I found the high points of my phrase. I'm emphasizing them with a little bit of vibrato, and the articulation, I would say, is always in service of not breaking the line up as best as I can, and showing where the high points are. So I might have a little bit more of an emphasis or weight on the D natural that I'm playing, because that is where I'm trying to show the phrase. So I'll just pick up from there and keep playing. So that gives you a little bit of how I would do it as a finished product. I'm not sure if it helped so much in terms of how I came to that, but it was very much following the hairpins that were on the phrase, right? The markings that are showing your crescendo and diminuendi, the articulations that are written there, but also how I'm interpreting the articulations, which are not always so literally. In this sort of vocal music, I'm thinking of not articulations that are fanfare trumpet, but I'm thinking of articulations that are closer to singing, which we all have some reference point to singing, whether it's humming a melody, whether it's singing an anthem, whether it's singing in church, or Bruno Mars, or something. So we know that the articulations are going to be connected more with the air, especially through the longer notes. And then I would say underneath those, there are some more subtleties. So at one point in this edition, there's dots with a slur over that. I think of that as very super connected, but still separated. And then I just am finding as much detail as possible, which is really what classical music is about, which is about, at every level you can always find more detail and more musical detail in in the music, and that's why this Arban, the art of phrase, is so interesting and satisfying to practice musically for me in a time where we have a lot of time off, and you can really stretch your imagination. So I really encourage all of you to do that. So anyway, if you have any more questions, please feel free to just write them in on Instagram, or I guess DM the HSO musicians, and I'd be happy to get back to you. We might post some video of this, so you have a reference point for this, but make sure you're looking up great recordings, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in to watch. And any more questions? How can you apply phrasing to technical passages and make them more understandable? Well, I would try to outline the larger phrase in the smaller notes by finding where rhythmically the phrase might be. So if the piece is in 4/4 and there's a lot of fast notes, I might be looking for the notes that are on 1 and 3 beats, big beats 1 and 3, to illustrate where where the larger phrase is, and then I would leave my air to that and practice outlining that, and then having the smaller notes lead to there. So maybe that's helpful. Chris, does breathing in the style that you are playing in help with phrasing? That was a really great question. I try to always breathe in service of the music that I'm playing. So this is in 4/4, and so I'm gonna, to start it, I think 1, 2, 3, breathe, play. And but more importantly, than that, breathing in the style of what you're about to play. So if you want to play something that is warm and melodious and not like something like we were playing, I'd like to think of a nice warm air breath that is very similar to the air that I want to put out. And I actually would encourage people to think of, so if I have to play something like, so 1, 2, 3. I think of the air going in about 3/4 of the speed that I'd like it to go out. So I'm thinking as a pendulum, I'm thinking a little bit slower to a little bit faster, and then out in the speed. But I'm always breathing a little bit slower and a little more cantabile than the air coming out, which is going to be just a little more driven. And that's for, I would say, all playing, especially the softer playing. And the softer I'd actually think of the air going in slightly more evenly to the type of air that I'd have going out. And if I have to play something really loud, I might be thinking in opposites. So not to breathe too fast, even if it's a short amount of time that I need to get the air in, but I'm thinking of a larger, warmer, fuller breath, even if the air expelled out is faster. How do you use this book when preparing for an orchestral repertoire? Well, the Arban book will help you in all aspects of in many aspects, and I would say 90% of the orchestral literature, in terms of the techniques that you're using in fanfare tonguing, in lyrical playing such as this. So it depends. If I'm playing a piece that it really requires me, let's say, to have a dotted rhythm, I might find the dotted rhythm section in the Arban book, and instead of practicing my orchestral material, I might refine the stroke of the articulation of the dotted 8th note to 16th rhythm and practice it here on whatever trumpet and in whatever key that I have to play, and then transfer that knowledge back to what I'm playing in the orchestra. So if my dad asked, how can you apply phrasing to a technical passage and make that more understandable? And can you demonstrate a lyrical approach to technical passage? So I have to give the fans what they want. I'm going to take it apart from Slavic fantasy, which is a cornet solo by Carl Hona, and there's a passage in it that is repeated 16th notes slurred and tongue. So with that, I think in groups of four and leading the notes leading the groups of four notes to the other first of four. So to outline it super slow. Now if I speed that up. So I'm always thinking. And in that, I really have to make sure that I am not letting it sound too choppy, which is I feel a little bit choppy right now, but if I were to practice it, I'm really making sure that the tongue, and goes for the triple tonguing and double tonguing the same, is out of the way and the air is getting through so that I'm able to show the longer notes of phrases in there. Okay. Well, are there any more questions? Seems like we covered some good stuff. And shout out to all of you watching, and thank you for watching, and hope you're finding some ways to keep in shape musically. And have a good day. Mahalo for watching.